This is not 1918. This is not you're on the Western Front and you're Germany in 1918, and all of a sudden you're going to have a collapse of your lines. The lines are actually the technology and the tactics and the way that the forces have optimized themselves for positional warfare mean that the lines move very slowly. And for the Russians to continue war fighting, it's going to take them a long time to get to these these territorial goals that they've set out for themselves. And so, therefore, it's very important that we orient ourselves on the fact that the reasonable place for negotiations to proceed from are the de facto contact lines and modifications of that, not we preemptively surrender the rest of Donetsk as the basis for the starting point for the negotiations.
Now, within Donetsk, a couple of things here. Pokrovsk is going to fall, or the Ukrainians are going to make a decision to withdraw from it and allow the Russians to consolidate the rubble that they've got left there and move their main defensive position back to other pre-prepared defenses. Do you think the Ukrainians have got strong pre-prepared defenses back and can set the conditions to hold the Russians up yet again for 12 to 18 months as they try to focus on another a defensive line or city or town and throw everything at it? And do you think that the cost to the Russians, and we've heard Zelensky talking about this, I think it was just before he went to Ireland, he made a speech and he turned around and said, it's not about the territory, it's about the cost that we can impose on the Russians. Do you think that's the factor that the Ukrainians are taking into account? And what are they doing with the time that they're buying and that cost? How important is that to the Russians?
Yeah. So two big thoughts come to me from those questions. We know for a fact that there are Ukrainian field fortifications and prepared positions further to the west of Pokrovsk. And so they do have positions that they can leverage. And this is part of the basis of my assessment that even when Pokrovsk falls, it's not as if it's going to blow a giant hole and you're going to have, Army Group Center, to make a World War II analogy, sort of plow its way through and thrust deep into central Ukraine, because there are other positions they can hold there. And the lines do move slowly, and the Russians are not able to mass anything larger than a platoon's worth of mechanized vehicles in any given location. So that's first thought. The other thought is there's more to the salient of the cauldron that the Russians have poured around Pokrovsk and just Pokrovsk. There's also Mirnograd, which is very slightly to the northeast of Pokrovsk. And the Russians, for the most part, have not penetrated that sort of satellite town nearly as deeply as they have into Pokrovsk, but the route for exfiltration and evacuation would be the same. And so obviously we would have to look up and think about, can the Ukrainians withdraw in good order from Mirnograd after the fall of Pokrovsk? The Ukrainian military, as of yesterday or 2 days ago, was claiming that they had established some alternative evacuation routes and that they've managed to do some unit rotations. I'm not able to verify that. But it seems like from all what we've seen that they're okay. But I will tell you, if you look at the map, it does look quite precarious. I'm very concerned for the Ukrainians that are in Mirnograd. So if Pokrovsk falls rapidly or suddenly, and the few 100 meters of terrain that is basically preventing an encirclement are lost, then that could look bad from Mirnograd. And it already looks bad because you don't have to physically control every meter of the exfiltration route, given you can interdict it with artillery and mortars and drones and other direct fire, indirect and direct fire weapons. So it's a sticky situation there. In terms of the negotiations and what's going on here, look, I think a lot of these Russian announcements and efforts to intensify the operations, these are designed to, again, shape the Trump administration's understanding of the battlefield, to manipulate their understanding of the battlefield and cajole them into accepting terms that are much, much worse. The good news is that ever since we had about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, the leaked 28-point peace plan, there's been a number of good revisions to that plan. So it was originally a 28-point peace plan. And then the Sunday before Thanksgiving here in the States, Marco Rubio went to Geneva to meet with the Ukrainians when it then got reduced down to a 19-point peace plan. And we don't know what the 19 points are, but my understanding is that a number of the most problematic provisions were just cut, and then other ones were amended. And then last Sunday, just a few days ago, Marco Rubio, or then met, or pardon me, Marco Rubio met with Ukrainians in Miami again to further workshop it. And now we have December 2nd, Steve Witkoff going to Moscow to, I think, present these terms to the Russians. And we had to have a plan for what is to happen the day after the Russians reject this plan, because they're going to have to, because the plan does not actually acquiesce to all of the Russian maximalist demands. And this is really where the Trump administration has a decision point to face, which is, are we going to allow Putin to keep stringing us along? He has this rejectionism about him every time that we come with him with a proposal, a ceasefire, something. He always rejects it. We had the Alaska summit, which was a waste of time. We've had previous, proposed Easter ceasefires and things like that, and he's got to pay a price. We have sanctions bills. We have the ability to improve Ukraine's weapons supplies. We have a lot of these things up our sleeves that we need to consider to play. So I hope the administration has that part clear, but we shall see.
Well, it's interesting. Marco Rubio seems to be the one that has taken what Steve Witkoff brought back from Russia and presented as a US plan, and then turned it into something that's a little bit more sensible. Do you have confidence that with Steve Witkoff taking it back to Moscow and not Marco Rubio taking it there, and Steve Witkoff being backed up by Jared Kushner, that there's actually anything of any sense going to come out? Or do you think Putin will take the opportunity to try and spin something back again, that Witkoff will come back and say, if we just do this and give Vladimir Putin this little bit of what he wants, then he'll sign a peace deal?
I suspect it's going to be more the latter, because all of the trends and the patterns, whenever we see Witkoff do this, he goes to Moscow thing, or he meets the Russians in the Middle East thing, it's always that pattern. And so, but I also think the Russians are likely to reject the plan, but do so not publicly. And I think they're going to reject the plan simply because if you study what Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov said last week, what Putin said in his big speech on November 27th in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, they're indicating that they're not willing to abdicate their maximalist war aims and their demands for territory and things that would severely compromise Ukraine's integrity and sovereignty as a regular country. It essentially exists as a country with a truncated sovereignty that doesn't, some countries are equal, but some are less equal than others. And that would be the case for Ukraine. So I think they're going to reject it. But interestingly, the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, yesterday also said that we're not going to do negotiations over, he said, over the loudspeaker, over the microphone. We're going to do this professionally. We're going to do this quietly. And I think that's actually quite tactful, because what Russia's going to do likely is reject the terms of the plan, but not do so publicly, so that it doesn't blow up publicly in the Russians' hands, and it doesn't make Russia look like they're bad. And of course, what the Russian foreign ministry and Kremlin spokesperson's offices are going to say, oh, Russia is open to negotiating, of course, and we're looking for the basis of constructive plans and that sort of thing, yada yada yada. But in reality, it's a little bit of rejection, and we must ensure that there's strategic clarity here. That actually every time it's the Ukrainians will make concessions. The 28 point peace plan, the 19-point peace plan, again, those entail concessions for the Ukrainians. Very few, if any, concessions for the Russians. And even then, when the Russians reject it, they need. I mean, we can't just give them everything they want. So it'll be very interesting to read the tea leaves of the statements that come out. But I think the key thing to orient on is the Russians are going to reject this plan.
Do you think the fact that the Russians pushed this 28-point peace plan, first of all, and the Russian disinformation operation that's going on about what the reality is on the tactical front line, is all an indication that Putin is actually sitting in Moscow quite worried about where the conflict is going for him at the moment? And he sees an opportunity to play Donald Trump through Steve Witkoff, and that being a way that he could try and get out of jail free in some way, or with something that he can declare as a victory, and park things till he gets his military and his economy and everything else sorted out again. Do you think the reality is Putin is in a much worse position and weaker position than we're actually thinking?
Yeah, I think that's basically true. I mean, if you look at Russia's GDP, I believe it's somewhere around $2 trillion. If you look at the international coalition supporting Ukraine, it's multiple orders of magnitude around that. If we lean into supporting Ukraine and defeating Russia, then Russia cannot conventionally win this war. I mean, they can't conventionally win this war when Ukraine has been kept on an anemic diet, and we drip feed Ukraine aid and do so sort of reluctantly and on delayed timelines and all that sort of thing. Look, there are indicators that are very bad for the Russians right now. In mid-November, they started selling non-liquid assets, gold reserves, for the first time. Putin last Friday, also in late November, signed a new VAT, value-added tax. He upped it from 20% to 22%. The Russians are in the business right now of retooling their fourth generation system to start a pipeline for the compulsory mobilization of reservists, as opposed to this previous, we pay you tremendous amounts of funds to go volunteer in Ukraine system. So, these economic issues are maturing, and they are becoming a problem for Putin. I don't know. I don't like to say he's worried. I don't like to say that, firstly, I don't know what Putin thinks, and I don't want to hyperbolize it. But there are constraints to the Russian war machine, and you wage a full-scale, high-tempo, large-scale combat operations for 4 years and 5 years when you didn't plan for it to be a 5-year war. You planned for it to, in fact, be a very short war, and you've made some questionable strategic resourcing decisions. Yeah, these things protract and they become bad, and so therefore Putin is very vested in us at the negotiating table making concessions that secure for Russia terrain, territory, political conditions that Russia is in no place to actually seize for itself on the battlefield.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.